Ms. Lowe is going to hand out the motion to everyone. Thank you. And I'm going to ask for the adoption of the minutes of the special council meeting of June 21st, 2020. We'll want to put that, Councillor Juncker, Councillor Charlotte. All in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, we're going to move right on to the new motion, number 6A. It is in front of you. Councillor Juncker, it's your motion. Do you want to put number 1 on the table, please?
Yeah, just with Ms. Lowe, it says 6A and then 1,
Okay.
2. Do you want it read separate then? It was meant to be a 2-part one?
Okay.
Or what would you prefer? Because it said they kind of contradict 6A and then it says 1 or 2.
Yeah, so 6A, so you can have it as an and that.
Okay.
Like.
Sure. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, I'll put it on the floor, Your Worship. So the motion reads that the proposed council mayoral remuneration increases that will be phased in over the next 3 years be removed from the draft budget. And then Part B reads that staff come back to council with a report on establishing a remuneration policy for city council to be in place for the start of next term.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Brooks Hill. So I want to make a statement and then we can discuss this further. So I'm going to speak to this resolution, Councillor Juncker. I've made a couple notes. The previous resolution put forward by Councillor Juncker was supported by myself along with the majority of council. I supported this because the prudent thing for a mayor to do is to support council and make decisions based on adequate input from staff and from others. Historically, Revelstoke Council remuneration has been low compared to other communities with a negligible increase for several years. When we were elected, we knew the wages were low. However, moving forward, we need to stop underpaying the people that are charged with making the decisions for the community. It is council responsibility to ensure that council remuneration is at least at industry standards. I believe doing this through a policy will ensure that remuneration is equal to industry standards and to stay at industry standards moving forward. We cannot shrink from that. Getting substantiated information from staff regarding an industry standard with proposed benefits will attract those who would otherwise not run for council and ensure members of council that their financial compensation is adequate for their work committed. So I'm going to ask if there's any others that have statements or have words that they would like to say moving forward with this. Councillor Ollie.
I think the proposal that you initially brought forward was a bold move. It was just. I don't think we should shirk from that. It was a fair pay for fair work. And as an employer of people, I would never expect someone to work for me for free or for under what they're worth. And I just think it's important that as a community, we would do that the same. We wouldn't treat people any differently. If they're doing hard work and dedicated to the cause, they should be compensated fairly and justly. Just generally, that's my feeling on it.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I just want to see if anybody else is going to, but I'll talk then.
Sure.
Or I'll say something. Yeah, so, Your Worship, thanks for the comments. And so I think this has been really interesting the past several, or what has it been, 3 weeks or whatnot. So this motion for me is important because I think it clarifies, which I've stood behind to many people, that some people have said, oh, you're backing down, you don't believe in it now or whatnot, and that's not true at all. I stand behind it. I believe that we do need to really increase the remuneration and at least have a really good look at it, and as you indicated in your comments, possibly benefits, or we had spoken before, myself and Councillor Brooks Hill, about looking at daycare options and whatnot, other things that other cities do to encourage other people to run for public office. I would have hoped that this could have gotten more so to the public process, or the public hearing, whatever you want to call it, so that we could have heard the public feedback at official meetings. However, the public vast majority has spoken now because of the things that transpired and whatnot. So I think the prudent thing now is to listen. I've had there was many negative comments that I read on social media about the actual motion. I've also had many positive comments, especially over the last week. I heard from a lot of people that were content with the council raises, maybe a little concerned that the mayoral salary was a bit too high. And as I had explained to people that the reason why that initial number was presented was because it was just a cost of living and higher than the mayor of Nelson, but I was never not willing to have that discussion. I think, as we all know, we just couldn't agree on numbers. But I think it's important to recognize that people have spoken, and I think we all still stand by that we support better pay for the job and whatnot. But I would say too that I think the biggest thing that I heard from people over the last few weeks wasn't so much, some people were concerned just about it, which there's always going to be people that believe in that, but I heard from a lot of people that were just more so upset with the implementation of it in this term, which is fair, and that's a fair comment. As I explained to people, that my thought has always been and was always just about the tax distribution, but I can respect that. Again, I would have preferred to hear that at the public meeting, but that's okay. I've heard it loud and clear now. But yeah, so that's why I put this on. I'm looking forward to having staff come back whenever they feel necessary. They'll do the homework and put the homework on the actual table for us and look at other options as well and proposals. And that'll be interesting because over the next few, I was just reading again in the last couple of weeks, a couple more councils now increasing remuneration. So it'll give more opportunity to see what other cities, towns, villages, districts do with theirs over the next couple of years, and for staff to come back and base off of that, and present that public report. But I think the other thing I just want to say is that going forward, I think that this has been a good thing for the city to go through, in the sense that it's brought I think it actually has brought the community more together in the fact that people got engaged, whether or not it's over a topic they want to be engaged on. But I think just moving forward, though, I would ask the public that there's obviously going to be tough decisions that need to be made, whether it's remuneration or improving developments, and every council's gone through it. But to be hard on the policy, not on the person. And I don't think it's fair for the public to attack the councillors or the mayor or staff personally, or their families. Attack the policy, criticize on social media all you want, come to public meetings. There's nobody here except one person. But to lay off the personal stuff, because I think that's, I've talked to a few people now about the by-election, and I think Peter Humphreys put on Facebook, you couldn't pay him $100,000 to do this now, and he ran in the last one just because he saw the personal attacks that were going on, and what my family endured, and my business. Thankfully, my owners are great owners, but what they had to endure as well from just horrid, nasty personal attacks. So I just hope this is a lesson for people. Be hard on the policy, not on the person, and I don't think this community, that represents the vast majority of our community, but yeah, anyway, so I hope that council supports this, these motions moving forward, and then I look forward, if it's supported, for staff to come back and do the homework, and then, because we can have something in place ready to go for the next term.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I'm going to actually echo some of those comments. I think there's people in the community that perpetuate negativity moving forward, and so let's hope that this doesn't get out of hand and bring it to a halt. I think everybody's entitled to an opinion, and I appreciate that, whether it's positive or negative. We've had lots of good opinions here in the community regarding that. I've had lots of good comments from other councils, other mayors, thanking us for bringing the issue to the forefront. So I think it's a positive moving forward. Councillor Sherwood.
Yeah, it's been a hard one. The whole last few weeks has been a really interesting discussion and debate. As you say, we've heard loud and clear from some parts of our community, but I would argue that we have not heard from the majority. Actually, every person I've talked to face-to-face, in person about this subject has been supportive. Both of the timing of the implementation of the raise, there were some concerns in wanting to have more of a fulsome discussion about the amounts and the timeline and what would this look like. And I was really looking forward to going through that process, through the formal public engagement time, when reports could be properly prepared, when we'd actually have the full financial picture. Regardless of how this goes today, I would really like to see us move strongly forward on this so that it is, if we do raise the stipend for council, that it does happen even a little bit before the next council comes in. From what I'm hearing, it's so easy to squash this because I don't need it. But I will be honest, I do. I'm going through my year-end financials right now for my business, and I'm looking at the impact of my capacity here, doing amazing work that I'm super proud of, and the impact that's having on my business and my own financial stability. Again, I would have loved to have this conversation as part of the public conversation, to share this properly. As we go forward, when we're looking at major processes like this, they can get complicated. It can get confusing, especially for the general public, the lay people, to understand where are we in the stages of this process. When we're looking at exploratory conversations like we were having in November when we first discussed this, how do we engage at that creative time? Versus now, when we're going into the more formal, okay, so for those of you who have a limited time frame to commit to paying attention to council, here's how you can engage, here's all the information so that you're properly informed to engage in a more efficient way. None of us have time for this kind of hyperbole on Facebook, where people are leaving comments when they really don't understand what the topic is, because we weren't at that stage of the conversation.
Right.
So I would love to have more clarity on this. I'm wondering if there's, and maybe we can talk about it another time, but to have some sort of a simplified workflow or timeline with key milestones, so when we're looking at the budget process and we're having meetings about these things, maybe it can be on display on a regular basis, like what we see with some of our consultants. Here's where we are in the process of engagement, just to make sure that we're all on the same page with that. So we're asking the right questions, making the right decisions. Because there's other discussions in this budget that really need to be had that I think have gotten lost now. So, the last thing I wanted to mention, I started going through my January day planner to try and figure out how many hours and what is my capacity for council. And I recognize that I haven't done a great job of tracking that. I do a reasonable attempts, but I haven't had to really report out to anyone yet. So feeling this now accountability to our community to report out on what is the work that I'm doing, because I know I'm spending hours at tables in amazing discussion, but I don't think I've told that story as well as I hoped. So my goal is hopefully over the next year to really track this and do a better job of telling that story, and I would hope that my fellow councillors would also do the same, so we can, as we get into this conversation around remuneration, we can be clear about this is why we do what we do. This is what we could do if we had the capacity.
Yep, fair enough.
Yeah, that's very
Fair statement. Anyone else? Councilor Burksville.
So I'm supportive of this motion, which probably doesn't surprise anyone, but I think it's really important to have a report, a sort of baseline information that we're all referring to look at how much are we paid here in Revelstoke, how much are people paid in similar communities, and one thing I was researching it online, I saw was price per capita is an interesting one, which the larger cities, it's like the smaller towns pay much higher price per capita, but just having these various comparisons, so when we're talking with the public, we can say this is where Revelstoke fits in. You can look at it a few different ways. In this sense, we're lower. In this sense, we're higher. But this is why we're doing this. Because I haven't basically talked to anyone who thinks that what we're paid right now is enough. The problem people had was the process, the fact that there was no clear reasoning behind these numbers, and the timing of it. Basically were the issues that I heard.
Okay. Councilor White.
I think the weakness in the way that this was released was the communication elements that we've been talking about. From the comparative is big on taxation on all fronts, not just the wage element. It should go form. So we're going to present a wage increase or a tax increase. We should have comparables on the table, and that should be public knowledge. Say this is where we fit, and to get rid of the uproar, get rid of all the fuss that's coming from this simple small element, as Nicole said, where we shouldn't be dealing with bigger things, is really trouble. And we should be nailing these things and presenting them well and controlling the dialogue, presenting it properly the way it should be. And that's a miss, but we're part of it. So I think we should be working on that in the future. I don't know if I'm fully in favor of the motion. I think there's a solution. Maybe we don't implement it this year. Maybe we just say over the next 2 years, we'll gradually bump it up to a fair wage for fair work. And somewhere 20,000 next year for the council, and maybe 50,000 for the mayor is a possibility. But I think those would be, for a full-time job for the mayor, I think that's woefully inadequate. But it's something that might be palatable.
Okay. Anyone else with a further comment? Councilor Shaw.
Just for clarity, we're voting on the first part of this motion?
Both
Or
parts.
The
both?
whole thing.
Okay. In which case, I would like to propose an amendment.
Okay?
That the staff come back to council with a report on establishing a remuneration policy for council to be in place, next year?
Next year.
For 2021's budget? Like, we can take it out of this year's budget, but put it into next year's budget so that we can get this incrementally increased. Because if we leave it to a 1-year increase, we're going to say no. It'll be a tax increase.
Are you talking about when staff have the information, they can bring it forward, not
Yeah.
give them a timeline?
Yes.
Is
Yeah.
that what you're thinking?
Yeah, let's take the timeline out.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the mover and the seconder, are they okay with a friendly amendment on that?
What would it read then?
So that staff come back to council with a report on establishing a remuneration policy for city council. Period.
Beginning next
No,
year.
no timeline.
No, no
We'll
time.
just take the timeline out and see what
When
the
the
report
staff has
says.
something together, whether that's next year or the year after, they can bring something forward for council to look at and go forward. Is that my understanding of your motion or your amendment to the motion? Councilor
Yeah.
Yunker, you had a question?
Yeah, okay, I can understand that, but just a question for Ms. Lowe then. Does it really matter then because staff are going to come back with a report and at that time there could just be a motion made at that time to implement that at that time too though, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I don't,
So it can be voted on, and so what I'm hearing
I
you
think
say is
we-
it
I
can
think
be
we-
voted on the way it is now, and then staff go ahead and work on this if they
Yeah.
have the capacity, and then a new motion be put on at that time
Yeah.
saying we have a plan, we want to look at this and go from there. Is that?
yeah, I think so. I understand Councilor Charlotte's concerns, but I think we just, because I think if you, for me, and I understand where Councilor Charlotte's coming from, but for me, this is not a top priority thing that needs to take up staff time. Obviously, we all agree we need to see a few more
Yeah.
things get done first that are in the queue, and I can respect that the report hopefully is gonna take time to, pardon me, to do the homework.
Yeah,
So I would think I would say let's leave it, and then when staff come back with the report, I would definitely consider supporting if you want to make a motion at that time, if you to implement it immediately or the next year or whatnot. This is just, I think right now, a guideline to be in place for next term. To be in place for next term doesn't mean it starts at next term. It
it
just
says
means
to start.
it says to
in
be in
place for the
place for the
start.
start of next term. That
Right.
could mean that it could be in a year before. I'm
Okay.
just saying, I think if, like Ms. Lowe,
Okay, as long as the door's not being closed.
no, door's not being closed to anything, because that's why if staff bring the report forward, anybody, myself, could make a motion and say, hey, what do you guys think? Do we want to implement this for next
Yeah.
year? If staff come back this year or next year, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But I definitely hear you, for sure.
okay.
Yeah, and who knows, at that time too, Councilor Schlett, staff bring it back, whatever, it'll be a public thing. We're gonna hear from people,
Yeah,
what do they think?
exactly.
Okay. Go
So just reading the second component of the staff come back, create a established remuneration policy to be in place at the start of the next term. Do we need that last
That's
section?
what we were just
Yeah, so
discussing.
if it's that line take, it doesn't make
For the
sense.
start of next term.
Yeah, all right.
It could be in place prior to that, as long as it's in place prior to the next term. That's why I didn't write to commence on the day of,
Okay.
because staff are gonna come back with a report and then we'll make a decision.
But you don't 3 years from now.
Pardon?
You don't want to come back with a recommendation 2 or 3 years? When do you want them to come back?
I'm not gonna put a set timeline for staff because staff will dictate what they have the capacity for.
Right.
So staff, I'll keep in touch with staff on the motion, but like I indicated, I could have put to come back by the end of May or whatnot, but with capacity right now, I wanna leave it up to staff to make the decision there, and I would expect that they'll advise us at the end of budget what things, or before that, what things look like in terms of the queue and stuff.
Do you want to add by next budget session?
No?
No. Okay.
I think I'm supportive of these motions because it leaves it open for any of council to bring forward a new motion once staff have gathered some information, to bring it forward and say, okay, let's work on this policy moving forward. So I think
That's how I tried to write it.
you're leaving the door open for those who want to move something forward or give them an option of moving something forward. You're not slamming the door. It gives the staff a chance to grapple with what you're proposing here and their capacity, and they may have some ideas.
Exactly.
So as they move forward, they may be able to say there's a way of bringing a policy in, whether it's in before the next term or just as the start of next term or ahead of that time. It'll give them the option of moving forward. So I'm supportive of that moving forward. So-
I just have a stupid tendency, like, it can get sidelined. My take is that if we wanted in the budget for the next 2 years, it's okay to remove it for this year, but let's put it in there for certain next year and the year following, that this is going to be addressed.
So there's an option of putting a motion on the table later, and the reason I say later is let's just give our staff a chance to kind of understand what's happening here so that they can come up with what's going to be the best policy moving forward. And once we put a policy in place, the policy will be there forevermore. So let's do it right as far as making it a policy and not just off the cuff. So I'm supportive of that, and it gives staff just a chance to absorb what's happening. Councillor Juncker.
Yeah, Your Worship, but I just want to say too, to Councillor Elliott's points about when you're talking about the comparison, this will allow staff to actually come back with that and then give specifications on how to calculate tax, whatnot. And then I would also state that we still, this is not removing the raise that we did separate from that, the tax adjustment, whatnot. So
Right.
No, that's already
that
Yeah.
still already built
Yeah.
in. But yeah.
Okay, any further discussion, Councillor Ryan?
Just a quick comment. While staff is looking at the remuneration policy, I would be interested to hear comments or whatever they come up with about some kind of parental leave policy. My understanding is we don't have one, and if we're looking at making it increasing remuneration to encourage more candidates to apply, then I think that would be worthwhile to look into as well.
And that's kind of why I said in my statement some proposed benefits, and so they would be best to look at
Yeah.
those things. So there's some gender equality when we talk about benefits and some things just overall from a family perspective. So I think if we allow the staff to work through that sort of thing, they'll be able to come up with some concise things that
Like a whole
are,
picture.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we get the whole picture, and then we can look at that and say, okay, this is the prudent way to go. Councillor Elliott.
I just don't want it to linger. Like, I want certainty that this is going to happen. And I know we tend to, there's a lot of things that we get bogged in and sidetracked on many different fronts. We're pulled many different directions constantly. And I think it's on the table now. Let's get it in front and once and done. That's I'd rather get it resolved as soon as I can.
Okay, good. Thank you for that statement. Any further comment on the motion on the table? Okay, I'm going to ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our tax distribution. Ms. McCabe.
Thank you. So today, we're at the last step before the proposed budget is approved by council for public comment. And so, as you all know, the community charter sets out the process, the financial planning process that municipal governments must follow. So today, we're going to be addressing the requirements in subsection 3.1. And the first one of those is that the identified proportion of funding for each source. This one is based on the approved budget. So the budget, it will have different revenue sources, and we'll just identify in the financial plan what percentage of revenue comes from each of those sources. So there's taxation, fees and charges, other revenues, grants, that kind of thing. The next one that's required is identification, to identify the distribution of property taxes among the property classes. And that is covered by our revenue and property tax policy, which is F9. And then the last one is to identify how permissive tax exemptions are used. So these will all be covered off in the bylaw and the financial plan that comes with it. So on April 28, 2008, quite some time ago now, Council Policy F9 was approved. It lays out the principles that Council will follow in determining the sources of funding and distribution of property taxes. There's 5 sources of funding identified in the policy. The first one is property taxes. The objective in the policy is to keep these low by using other funding sources wherever possible. The next source that's identified is parcel taxes. These are usually used for local service area extensions. We also have a parcel tax that partially funds the sewer fund. So there's some revenue that comes into that fund from the parcel tax. The next source is fees and charges. The objective for these is sometimes cost recovery. An example would be development services permits, the fire department permits, fees, things like that. There's also the objective with some, like for instance, recreational facilities where it's more about affordability and cost recovery. Then there's other sources. These can include grants from higher levels of government. It can include the return on investments. It also includes the cost sharing revenues that we get from the regional district. And then the final source is borrowing. This is only used for long-term capital infrastructure projects, so we cannot borrow for things that are short-term. So the policy also identifies for property taxes that the policy identifies the objective for the residential share, and it is set at 50% or higher. And so in 2019, the residential share of the property tax burden was 51%. And so based on this, it is staff's recommendation that we apply the current year property tax increase equally across all of the property classes. This is with the exception of class 2, which is utilities. We'll discuss that later. By doing that, we maintain consistency with the policy, the current policy. So I thought you might want a little bit of history on property tax increases. And so this is the 5-year average increases for each of the property classes, and then the overall increase to the bottom, which has been 3.36% over the last 5 years. Residential properties have seen an increase in the last 5 years as high as 6% and as low as 2%. Businesses and other, which is what we call class 6, has seen a tax increase as high as 4% and as low as 1%. Major industry has seen their highest has been 4.5 and their lowest has also been 1%. And so so then we have a 3.36 average over all the years. So one thing to note is that the non-residential tax increase, so that's the increase for all of the other classes other than residential, has been lower than the residential tax increase in 4 of the last 5 years. So in 2020, there's going to be 2 financial policies that will be reviewed, and one of them is the one we just discussed, Policy F9, the Revenue and Property Tax Policy. The review will consider the principles discussed in the BC Government Report referred to in my report. If you wanted to read the full report, I do have a copy of it. It's 88 pages. It's actually quite good. It's got a lot of history about the property tax system in BC and why it is the way it is and the decisions that were made. I find it interesting reading anyways. So we're going to, and we'll look at the principles in there. So that report identifies a number of principles. One of them is equity and fairness in the property tax system, which can refer to either the benefits received principle, which means that you're paying for what you're getting, or it also can refer to the ability to pay principle, which is what our income tax system works on. It's more about ability to pay than benefits received. Another principle that we look at is stability, and that can be looked at in 2 different ways. One of them is a year-over-year stability for property owners of what their taxes are going to be. And then the other one is reliability for municipalities. So property taxes are a fairly reliable and stable source of revenue for municipalities to cover their operating costs. We try to achieve neutrality when we're setting property tax policy, and that means that we're not setting things that are going to impact potentially economic decisions being made by people. We also look for simplicity, and that comes from, in two parts, understandability in the system that we're using, as well as administration of it. It needs to be simple to administer. And then we also look for accountability. And so in the case of us, locally raised taxes are spent locally, so that's one way we're accountable. And the other way for accountability to look at is understanding benefits provided by the property taxes being paid by the residents. So the updated policy will then guide the decisions regarding property tax distribution and sources of funding. The other policy that we're going to look at is a permissive tax exemptions policy. Right now, this is embedded in our grants and aid policy. Both of these, grants and aid and permissive tax exemptions, are both designed to support council's strategic objectives by helping local organizations reduce their tax burden. But the tools are different, and so we are going to look at actually creating a policy that's separate, which is common in most municipalities to have two policies, one for each. And so we're going to look at that as well. So there's two resolutions before you today. The first is that the current financial plan objectives and policies, which is what's in F9, and policy F9, related to taxation and revenue, be approved for use in the 5-year financial plan. And then the second resolution is that the distribution of property taxes between the property classes for 2020 remain consistent with the prior year, which is the same increase for everybody.
Yeah. Councillor Ryan.
In Schedule E, in 2020, it shows that property value taxes go down from 53% to 41%. Is there a reason for that?
Oh, because in 2019, we had budgeted extra revenues in there for, the budget in 2019 was based on the pre-supplemental assessments. And so there was that reduction in the property tax revenue. So when I do the budget for 2020, I have to do it on the actual taxes we received in 2019, not the budgeted amount.
I'm confused, sorry.
So in 2019, we budgeted to receive more in property taxes than we actually did.
Right. And so those other sources are what then? That's compensating for it. It's just like 35% at the bottom.
Yes, that would be, there's some grant revenue in there as well. That's where the grant revenues would go.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to get somebody to put the first motion on the table. Councillor Juncker.
That the current financial plan objectives and policies related to taxation and revenue be approved for use in the 5-year financial plan.
Seconded for that motion, Councillor Charlotte. Any further discussion on the motion? Councillor Juncker.
Yeah, Your Worship. So, prior to knowing that staff were going to review the policies, I was going to ask for the policies to be reviewed because I'm not sure if I like how this all works. I know just by looking at these graphs, the residents have definitely been paying the most the last few years, and it might be time that we look and spread this out. Although I'm also a huge supporter of small business and don't want to see them hurt, and then at the same time don't want to place any additional tax burden on the forestry industry as they're really having a tough time. So, but I think to have the ability to be able to look at that is the right tool that we need. So, but I don't want to be going into trying to change policies right now as opposed to needing a budget passed. So I will support it for now. I think it's good.
Any further discussion? Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, this is exciting. It's kind of cool when you see some goals set in writing. Because I remember being on the Chamber of Commerce in a lot of this conversation with trying to reduce the tax burden on small businesses because it still is quite challenging. But it's challenging for residents as well. So we'd set a goal in writing, we have achieved that goal, and it's time to set the new one. So it's exciting to see this come around full circle and be at the table as we go forward. So I'm perfectly comfortable with this.
Good. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to ask a question on 6, number A1. Councillor Juncker, did you have a question? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to 2. Someone put that on the table. Councillor Juncker.
That the distribution of property taxes between the property tax classes for 2020 remain consistent with the prior year.
Seconded for the motion, Councillor Gillette. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Brooks Hill.
So I still don't understand this fully. So essentially what we're saying is that we're going to raise taxes 6% throughout all the classes. Now, okay, so I got that part right. The other part I don't understand exactly is as the tax pools don't grow at the same rate, right? So, you know, if residential, the total valuation is $100 million and commercial, say it's also $100 million, and then 1 year commercial grows 50 million, but residential grows 10 million. If you have the same tax rate, suddenly commercial's paying
We're talking
lower
about
tax.
tax rates, we're talking about tax revenue.
Tax revenue. So the tax revenue. So we're keeping the tax revenue from
Yeah,
each
the
class,
distribution, yes.
but not the tax rate.
No, exactly. The tax rate will be determined because I will take the total revenue required from each class and I will divide it by its assessment base.
So this year with the RMR reduction or being taken out of class 6, how's that going to affect?
It changes the size of the two pies. So the residential pie is now bigger and the business pie is now smaller by those dollar values. And so yes, I will take the total revenue to be collected from residential property and I will divide it by the pie, which is the assessment base.
So when you were quoting us numbers for a tax increase on the average house, were you taking this relative pie size into consideration?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which is why we do it based on revenues and not tax rates, because when the pie gets bigger, if nothing else changes, the rate will go down.
Right.
If revenues and pie stay the same, then rate stays the same. If pie gets bigger and revenue stays the same, the rate gets smaller.
So in theory, this year taxes on commercial will, the way I see it at least, will go up.
No, because I'm basing it on 2019 revenue, so I'm actually basing it on actual taxes collected already. So, and that was based on the assessment pie with the adjustment already done in 2019, so it's not made in 2020.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Clear?
Yeah, I think I understand it. Don't ask me in 10 minutes.
All right. Any further questions for Ms. McKay regarding
Just
pie?
go ahead. The major industry, what major industries? Just the
It's class 4, and so the predominant one here would be the mill, but there is a couple of other small properties, I believe, that are in class 4. I couldn't tell you what they are though. But light industry would be things like the brewery. That's a good example of a light industry property.
So the rates for each of those categories stays the same as last year, but
Well, the tax rate will change, but I'm going to take the revenue we collected from each of those classes and I'm going to grow it by 6% and then take that number and divide it into their assessment base to get a tax rate.
and what about new construction, new buildings?
New construction comes in afterwards, and so we set the tax rate without considering new construction. We do have a budget line item in the budget where we're assuming we're going to get approximately $75,000 in revenue from new construction already. And so that's what that number is. New construction, I'm expecting it to be somewhere around that number, maybe a little more, maybe a little less.
75,000 is enough? Like there's an awful lot of new construction.
There is, but I'm basing that on the non-market change report that I received from BC Assessment in November.
Right.
And so that's showing me maybe 100,000, but I know that that number always goes down after the appeal process has been done.
Right.
So, and I've seen it drop by as much as 25%, so I'm gonna leave it at 75,000.
And the taxes that were lost from the appeal of the land R&R base, that's was an overestimation of anticipated revenue in the past, is that correct? So they're not, there's no ill will we should feel for R&R for appealing their tax base. It was just an overstep on our part of assuming too much money. So
It
it's
was
nothing,
fine.
there's no
Exactly.
loss of revenue for.
It was classed incorrectly, and we relied on that incorrect classification because that's what BC Assessment had classed it as,
Yeah.
and we relied on that, and then we set tax budgets accordingly.
Yeah. I just want to be careful, we're not saying that they're going to be reducing their input, they make a significant impact on our towns.
Okay, so we moved this forward, we've got a seconder, and ask a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried, thank you. So, thank you, Ms. McCabe. We look forward to further information and discussing it to the public, et cetera, et cetera.
So, Your Worship, then,
Ms. Lowe has a timetable, is that what you're going to ask about?
Yeah, I checked the schedule.
Okay.
I don't see anything in the schedule for next week, that's why I was just wondering for budget.
Could be
That's correct, it will be coming forward at the February 27th meeting.
27th or 25th? Regular council on 25th?
Yes.
And then budget on
Yes, right, got the wrong date. 25th,
So it's coming on the 25th.
the actual budget and the community consultation document for your council's consideration approval to go forward to the public for consultation.
on the budget.
Yes.
Yes,
One resolution. It's a little one.
25th.
yeah, 25th, sorry, we got the wrong date on our timeline, yeah, 25th.
Okay, cool.
Okay. I have nothing further, so I'm going to ask for a termination of the meeting, and so someone want to make that? Councilor Juncker, Councilor Brooks Hill, if there's any of you that have, just give me 5 minutes afterwards. I have a couple things I would like to discuss with you, just as council